So I just wanted to create an emergency update for Tesla stock because it's very likely that we're about to witness even more capitulation and selling pressure for Tesla stock. Now, this is obviously horrible news, but if you've been following this channel and watching my videos, this really isn't news at all, as I've been ringing the alarms about Tesla stock pretty much since December when Tesla stock was at these euphoric highs of $490, and I was like, hey, Tesla stock is overextended, but of course, no one wants to listen when things are hitting new all-time highs. Who wants to listen to the bad news? But we started seeing the selling pressure continue, and I kept making updates about Tesla stock, and it just continued selling off, and I continued making updates. However, we ended up having this kind of a bounce take place over here, and this was right after we had that infomercial commercial at the White House with the stamp of approval for Tesla by President Trump, saying, look, these are good cars. And around that time, I was bombarded with emails, DMs, some comments of people saying, Justin, you're wrong. Tesla stock is going to hit new all-time highs. Just wait on it. It's coming in the next few months. However, fast forward a couple of weeks later, and we're approaching the lows that we were back in March. And it's very likely, especially with the news that we recently just got, that Tesla stock is going to be falling down. Now, I make these videos just to help you prepare yourself for what's going to be coming. And I know, some people are very loyal and married to the Tesla stock brand and the name, that they kind of want to ignore the fundamentals, the technicals, the macros, everything. But let's go ahead and talk about that for the people who are willing to listen, right? So first off, before we actually talk about the ugly, something that's pretty interesting is that Wedbush, literally one of the most bullish analysts on Wall Street for Tesla stock, lowered its price target from 550 to 315. And they wrote a lot about the reason why, but pretty much it comes down to Musk created brand crisis and then the Trump tariffs. Oh wow, this sounds like something that I literally have been talking about for the last few months, about sentiment not looking well for Tesla, especially after the actions of Elon Musk. And, I've talked about how globally we've seen these dealerships have cars being blown up, the vandalism for Tesla. And, of course, I'm saying, look, that's not good. People shouldn't be doing that, of course. But what I'm saying is that obviously the sentiment is very sour for Tesla, and that was the reason why we're going to see prices fall down. Well, now, after prices have, literally just collapsed, now they're lowering their price targets, right? And that's just typical of what you're going to see from these analysts, right? Especially the sell-side analysts on Wall Street. I always say they're glorified marketers because oftentimes they say these insane price targets, and it's really just to attract buyers to go ahead and buy up the stock, right? Maybe they have some incentive, if they have a position, or sometimes even brokerages, they'll have their analysts say, oh, look, the stock's going to go to the moon, just to drive up demand. But they end up changing things real quick once they look pretty silly, right? I mean, you look pretty silly saying, hey, I see Tesla stock to be $500 in the next 8 months when we're literally at 200, right? 240. So just pretty interesting. But let's go to the ugly. So we had Bill Ackman, who, if you don't know, he's a fund manager for Pershing Square, right? And he pretty much has been crashing out on Twitter or X, right? And I'm not going to read the whole entire thing, but pretty much the end, he says, the president has an opportunity on Monday to call a timeout and have the time to execute on fixing an unfair tariff system. Alternatively, we are heading for a self-induced economic nuclear winter, and we should start hunkering down, right? So kind of this long cry for, hey, Trump, let's pause it. Then 1 minute before futures opened, or after, right, he said there's still time for a ceasefire before millions of people get hurt. So he's kind of crying out loud saying, hey, maybe we should pause. Trump, please pause. And, many are speculating that he's kind of doing this cry for help because he's about to get margin called. I don't believe that Bill Ackman's fund uses leverage and uses margin. I could be wrong, but it wouldn't be surprising, especially since the last few days. I don't know if you guys have read the news, but several hedge funds have gotten margin called. They're getting liquidated, right? And this is the reason why when we take a look at the S&P 500, we see this huge selling pressure going down. I mean, look at the volume, right? The volume is insane as it's falling down. And someone who may not be familiar with technical analysis on a deeper perspective, one thing that you'll learn, right, and especially in the Chartered Market Technician program, which I'm currently enrolled in, they talk about volume in the sense that I think a good way to explain it is a voting machine, right? So the higher the volume is, the more participation there is, and that kind of confirms the price. So when price is falling down, that means all the people participating agreed that this is where the price should be at. And so that's a bit concerning, right? Because we are literally just falling off of a cliff, right? This is a big drop down. But of course, I want to kind of just stick back onto Tesla, right? Let's kind of ignore the broader markets and just stick back to Tesla. But anyways, people are speculating that this fund manager is crying out for help because he's getting margin called. Who knows, right? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Just kind of, we do know that this is like a cry for help. Now, interestingly enough, we had the future markets open up, and the Russell 2000 briefly hit its limit down threshold of 7%. Now, the future markets, they operate differently from the stock market, right? The stock market, you have circuit breakers, and there's several different levels, right? You have level 1, where I believe it's 7% by 3:15 p.m. on the day. If the S&P 500 falls by that amount, they turn on the circuit breakers and they halt trading for 15 minutes, right? If you guys were around during COVID, you guys saw that the circuit breakers had to be turned on. Well, for futures, it's slightly different, right? They're not called circuit breakers. It's limit down, right? And what this means is it doesn't necessarily halt trading. It just puts a floor saying, hey, look, we're going to not allow any selling or shorting below the certain level. And it's so that the buyers could have a chance to step in. But if the buyers don't buy anything up, then essentially we see this freeze in the future markets. And so then you have to wait to the next session. And long story short, this is not good news. This is just not good news, right? When you have the circuit breakers turn on, you have the markets having limit down days. That's not good news. But let's also talk about some other things, right? So after the future markets recently opened, we got news that brokerage firms are now issuing circuit breaker alerts, as there's this huge speculation that the stock market tomorrow when it opens is likely to have to start the circuit breakers, just like I was talking about. They're going to have to probably halt trading if things continue looking sour, and it's likely that they will. And I got some further news to talk about what kind of makes things look a bit uglier. And I'm laughing not because it's funny, but sometimes under stress you may start laughing a bit. Now, personally, I'm not exposed to a lot of cars. I'm definitely not exposed to Tesla right now. I got rid of Tesla at a great time. You're not going to time everything perfectly, but I know when I talk about Tesla, selling Tesla, people are like, Justin, you're ridiculous. And I think it's oftentimes because, when Tesla stock was riding up, I made several videos saying, look, we're likely to see Tesla stock ride up for this reason, etc. But I don't marry a stock, right? When I see the signs, right, kind of flashing ahead saying, hey, look, it's probably not a good time to hold, I'm not going to stick to my guns and hold a stock. I'm going to go ahead and rotate because it's all about managing capital, right? Again, everyone participates in the market differently, and that's okay, right? It's completely fine. I'm just, right now, my exposure is more towards financials and also hedging a bit, right? We'll talk about that later in this video, but besides that, I want to talk about something else. So crude oil is also falling off a rock, right? And I've talked about this on X recently. I said, look, oil, this is something I tweeted on the 5th, so yesterday. Oil is a global economic indicator, so a sharp drop in oil prices reflect expectations of lower global demand. And what this means is that this could kind of signal that a slowdown or concern about future growth is around the corner. Now, again, I said this is just speculation, but, when you see crude oil fall down like that, you kind of have to read between the lines and say, is this kind of meaning a recession is around the corner? I mean, we had JP Morgan, right? Their analysts mentioned that there's now 60% chance of a global recession. So not just a domestic recession, a global recession. So just keep that in mind. But what makes everything worse recently? So we had Gurgavin, right? He kind of just reposted what Bloomberg said. So Trump mentioned that he's not making a deal with China unless China solves trade deficits. Now, China over the weekend seems like they're not willing to play, or just give up, and they're just throwing retaliatory tariffs as well. And so instead of having a president, kind of saying, okay, maybe we have to try another negotiation tactic, he's kind of doubling down. And since this news came out, future markets fell down even further. Not of course the Russell already hit its limit down for the day, but other pockets of the future markets are kind of falling down. And so we even had Elon Musk recently. I don't know if it was earlier today or yesterday. Kind of talk about how we need free trade, kind of going against the tariffs. So it almost seems like everyone is kind of against this, right? It's like this self-induced recession because of trade deficits, which aren't inherently bad. I won't delve into that. I talked about that in I'm stuttering now. In a second other video, other videos, right? I talked about that, right? The reason is because breaking that down can take an additional 5 to 10 minutes, and I don't feel like just breaking down economics right now. I just want to kind of provide this quick warning that we may end up seeing Tesla fall down even further for a Bloody Monday, right? Now let's talk about the pockets, right? So again, my exposure isn't in Tesla, or I'm actually kind of away from a lot of companies that have exposure to the risk from tariffs being implemented, right? But still, a lot of pockets of the market are falling down. For example, if I take a look at XLF, right? Even XLF is falling down, right? So even that's falling down. Literally all the different sectors here have fallen down. So not a good look, right? There's definitely a lot of panic. We see volatility at these high extreme levels. But I'm in the sector that's less likely to have as much pain as other companies. For example, let's take a look at actually we won't look at other companies real quick. What I want to talk about is what you can do to hedge. Of course, there's always the inverse ETFs. You could look at SPXS. So when the market's falling down, XPSS literally is the triple leverage inverse of it for the S&P 500, so it's going to go up. I believe even Tesla has an inverse leverage ETF. I don't remember the ticker name off the top of my head. Maybe TSXL or XS. I honestly, so if someone remembers it off the top of their head, please comment it down in the video. Maybe I'll comment it down in the video. I know there's an inverse, so that if you're in Tesla and you want to kind of hedge your position, you could kind of hold on to the inverse leverage version of Tesla. So as Tesla's falling down, you have exposure to the inverse of it, which is going up. So it kind of freezes or kind of it puts a Band-Aid on the bleeding, right? So you could look at inverse ETFs. Bonds have you're pretty much the long-term bonds. Hold on, let's look at TLT. TLT is above its 200-day moving average, right? So long bonds are falling down as the yields are kind of falling down, and bonds and yields, your yields have like this inverse relationship. As yields fall down, the bond prices go up. So that's another kind of pocket of the market. So all I'm trying to say is, hey, look, protect yourself, because things can start to get ugly, especially when you have the most bullish people on Tesla kind of now changing their opinion, which I think again is just funny because they literally said this. It's just ridiculous. But on top of that, fund managers basically doing an outcry. Not good. Not a good look, right? Hedge funds are getting liquidated. I don't know. You guys be safe out there. Again, you should only trade and invest in whatever you see value in. And before you guys go, make sure to check out this video over here, and I'll see you guys on that next video. Take care, guys.